It is now time for me to introduce the introducer for our keynote address. And the introducer is someone that if you've been coming to our colloquia, you know and love our Dr. Yvonne Wan, a professor and vice chair for research in the Department of Pathology on campus. And she is come to join us to introduce today's colloquium keynote address speaker. So with that, I'm going to end my share screen and welcome Dr. Yvonne Wan.
Thank you, Catherine. Good morning, everyone. All right, good morning. It's really a great pleasure for me to introduce today's plenary speaker, Dr. Nada Milosavljevic, who is a board-certified physician in both psychiatry and neurology, and a faculty member at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Milosavljevic practiced both conventional and integrated medicine for cognitive and behavior condition. She is also the founder and the director of Integrated Health Program at Massachusetts General Hospital. This is a collaborated research study and treatment program with Boston area school. The program was named one of the top 10 big ideas to transform education by Boston Globe magazine. She is also the founder and CEO of Sage Tonic. This is an innovative holistic program for wellness. The proceeds of Sage Tonic benefit high school students to provide education and treatment to promote preventive health. And she worked as medical advisor to international tea industry journals and is a contributing health and wellness writer for several publications. And Dr. Milosavljevic is considered as an industry expert and speaks in this capacity for business and academic organization. In addition, she also provided expert testimony before USDA regarding the update to the US dietary guideline. Prior to her career in medicine, she practiced the law with the focus in the intellectual property in biotech industry. She also authored numerous publications, academic articles, and has been featured in many popular social media. We are very fortunate to have her to deliver the plenary lecture today. The title of her presentation is the Popularization of Food as Medicine and its Impact on Tea. And if you have any question regarding her presentation, please submit your question in the chat box. So without further ado, let's welcome Nada.
Good morning and good afternoon and good evening. I know people are joining from many different areas. Let me just pull my slides up for you to get started. Okay, well, thank you so much, first of all, to everyone at GTI for having me here today at this wonderful colloquia. And thank you to Catherine for the wonderful introduction today, and to Yvonne for introducing me to the conference. So thank you so much. I have a lot of information that I want to share with you today. And as Catherine has already mentioned, and Yvonne as well, my talk is going to relate to the popularization of food as medicine, and certainly looking at tea from the standpoint of wellness. With that, and with all the information that I'd like to share, I'm excited to share it with you. So let's begin. And as I've mentioned, looking at the concept of food as medicine, but through the lens of tea. Many of you here today may be well familiar with the notion of food as medicine, functional foods, functional medicine, but some may not. So for certain persons, this may be a bit of a review, and yet for others, this may be new information. So I'm going to go in depth on certain concepts, other ideas I may touch upon, but what I really want to do is highlight the breadth and scope of tea's application as a medicinal food and ways that it can be combined with other herbs to have a synergistic or additive effect for health, which I find very exciting. I'm in the innovation space, and I'm always looking for new ways to have new developments, new avenues to bring tea to consumers from a health perspective. So first of all, with any talk, I always think it's important to go back in time and to understand a bit of the history, because that's going to lay the foundation or sort of set our path moving forward. So with that, a bit of the food as medicine concept, and it really spans millennia. Back in ancient Greece, you had Hippocrates, who discussed food dietetics, using compounds, using foods to calm the humors and for health. Then, of course, I'm sure many of you here today are familiar with the concept of TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, going back thousands of years. And some of those old ancient texts refer to herbal medicine and to teas for health. And then going to yet another culture, Indian Ayurveda, and some of the ancient texts known as Vedas, and the concept of doshic balance. And if someone is to embark on an Ayurvedic treatment, many of those treatments, some of the first forms are using dietary changes or food as medicine. And then we have Japanese Kampo. And since the 5th century AD, this has been a treatment used in Japan. It fell out of favor briefly and then came back into popularity, so much so that in 1967, the Japanese government recognized it and covered it by national health insurance. So again, you have its use being advanced due to its recognition in the modern era. Now moving to North America, of course, Native American cultures used many herbal treatments for health. But what I'm going to focus on today is more of the modern era and the concept of Western medicine and how we're looking at food from a medical perspective, tea from a medical perspective, and as a functional health treatment. So in the 1970s, we had increased cultural exchange with China. And during that time, interest in TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, grew. And within that were the concept of herbs and teas. And then moving forward to the 1980s, something happened in the US. We experienced an epidemic, a condition we had never seen before, that there was no known cure and few available treatments. And that was the AIDS epidemic. But what the medical community realized is that patients who had better or more optimized nutritional status, it affected their survival and they lived longer. And what that meant is the concept of using food as medicine was born in the sense that it started to be applied in patient care settings. So both for short and long-term conditions, things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cognitive disorders. So you started to see it applied with greater frequency. And certainly today you have countless media sources that highlight its use and application for health and longevity. And this notion of food as medicine fits within the growing field of integrative and functional medicine. And I'm going to go a bit in depth on what that is as well, because it definitely touches upon tea, and it's something that's being used with greater frequency. It's growing in popularity. So it's something I'd like you to have a good handle on. So first of all, let's start with its definition. Integrative and functional medicine, what is it? It's a medical approach that focuses on the root cause of disease. So rather than looking simply at a system or symptom, you want to look at, all right, is that symptom related to a metabolic disorder, a nutritional deficiency, something that we can really get in depth to address and have a more complete constitutional health improvement. So doing a root cause analysis, what you often do, or what it will include, is looking at someone's genetic history and do they have certain predispositions, but also looking at someone's environmental stimuli and epigenetics. And epigenetics is a really exciting field. I have a particular interest in it, and certainly it's become a hotbed in terms of medical research. And what that is it's looking how you can affect a change in an organism caused by a modification of gene expression, but not the genetic code. And I want to describe that a bit further because it's really a powerful statement, and it's something that's going to touch upon the herbs and certainly tea as well. So let's say you have certain lifestyle and dietary changes that you make. If you drink tea on a regular basis, if there's certain forms of exercise that you engage in or meditation, we're learning that some of these lifestyle choices are affecting the way our genes are expressed, meaning someone may have a predisposition for a certain disease, and yet if they make certain lifestyle choices and changes, the risk of that condition expressing itself may be reduced. And tea fits well within this. So I mentioned some of the lifestyle factors, your nutritional status, also stress, and I'm going to go in depth on that as well, because some of the herbs that I'm going to discuss today, and certainly tea, can have an effect on that, certain allergens, and of course, toxins that someone is going to be or might be potentially exposed to. So this notion of epigenetics is very exciting because it is something that is within your control to engage in and to promote your own health and certainly the health of those around you, family members, friends, certainly consumers of products, some of the herbs and teas that we're going to talk about. Now, I wanted to give you a few examples of food as functional medicine and ways that this concept of epigenetics can play a really powerful role in terms of our health. And I have a few of them listed here. Some you may be well familiar with, others maybe not. One that I'm quite fond of, I thought it was a wonderful study, is called the Nigerian Paradox. And this was some research that was done back in about 2006 with a university in the US, I believe Indiana University, and a Nigerian university. And what they were looking at were thousands and thousands of patients who carry the ApoE4 gene. Now, this gene is a gene that, if present in an individual, it can raise your risk of developing Alzheimer's significantly. But what they found is as they were making a comparison of the lifestyle factors of different communities of patients who carry this ApoE4 gene, they found a difference, and it relates to this concept of epigenetics. They found that the group they were studying in Nigeria, while they carried this gene, had a much lower presence of Alzheimer's disease in their community. And it was linked to these epigenetic or lifestyle factors. They had more of a plant-based diet, their exercise was different, stress levels were different, and they had a decreased Alzheimer's disease frequency compared to these other communities. So one example of food as medicine, lifestyle as medicine. Another is the Mediterranean diet. Now, this one, yeah, I think everyone here today may have heard of this in one way or another, because it is one of the most extraordinarily well studied of all the food as medicine or functional medicine diets. And in fact, this just appeared a few weeks ago. For the 5th year in a row, this diet has been named the best overall diet for health by it was over 40 researchers globally looking at many different diet and lifestyle factors. We know that it can help to decrease inflammation, and I'm mentioning or peppering in the notion of inflammation now because I'm going to go more in depth on that later. It's something linked to many other conditions. It's something where a number of herbs and tea can play a role. Another one is the keto diet. That's quite popular in media today. It downregulates inflammatory triggers. So again, that notion of inflammation and the inflammatory cascade when it is allowed to spiral out of control can lead the path to certain disease conditions. But this diet has been found to support aspects of neuronal growth. It's also being applied now to certain cognitive illnesses, and they're finding it can play a role. And the other one I have listed here is the restricted or fast mimicking diet. Intermittent fasting is another concept that you may have heard of. And we found that this diet can help to improve insulin sensitivity, so it can play a part in those trying to prevent diabetes or lessen some of its effects. So just a few examples, but you can see how far-reaching this whole notion is of food as medicine or food as a functional medicine to affect a physiologic change in the body. So with that in mind, how rapidly is this field of functional medicine growing? Because food as medicine fits well within that paradigm. So where is all of this heading? And for some of the statistics that I'm going to present here, I actually want to give a shout out, if you will, to Mr. Dan Bolton from Tea Journey magazine. He's been an industry leader for many years, but he was helpful to me as I was gathering some of these statistics. So I would like to thank him for that. A bit about the numbers here. First of all, chronic diseases. What are we talking about? Things like heart disease, cancer, diabetes. And these chronic illnesses account in the US alone for an astonishing 86% of healthcare costs. And I find that percentage staggering. So there's a rise in functional medicine, which stems from the increase of evidence-based research that's confirming some of these different functional medicine, food as medicine techniques to help with disease risk reduction, to help with disease prevention. And in some cases, they can actually affect reversibility to some degree through nutrition and lifestyle changes. So it's a powerful concept. This whole idea of epigenetics can really carry someone a long way in terms of preventive health and long-term health. Another thing that's promoting its use is there's increased recognition by employers and insurance companies to cover these treatments. So when someone knows that they can engage in these healthy practices and have it be covered by insurance, of course, they want to know more about it, they want to get more involved, and they want to start using them. And so these are ways that some of the herbs I'm going to talk about, and certainly teas, can have a greater use to promote health. Another statistic that I think is an important one to keep in mind as you are considering, where is this field headed? How might tea be affected with this growth of functional medicine? The global CAM stands for complementary and alternative medicine, of which tea is one. The global CAM market is expected to exceed $400 billion by 2028. And that number is really shocking. But I also think it's important for those within the tea industry to understand where this is headed and how tea can be a part of that tailwind or that upsurge in use. A few more statistics. I really think the time that we're living in today, no talk is complete without mentioning how the global pandemic, how COVID has affected these trends. Well, it has really affected the functional medicine market, the food as medicine concept in a very big way. And here's a few of the numbers to show you to what degree. Herbal supplement use by 2020, or in 2020, increased by over 17% in the US alone. And that is the first double-digit growth in this industry in over 2 decades. The herbal supplement sales exceeded $11 billion in the US, and that was an absolute record. So this is certainly on the upswing, and it's going to continue for some time. Now, in 2020, what were some of those top selling herbs? Now, the ones I have listed here on the right side of my screen are by no means exhaustive. I'm only listing a few, but also the ones that I picked are herbs that are quite frequently blended with tea to kind of have an additive or synergistic effect for health, but for the apple cider vinegar. First one, ashwagandha. It's a time-honored Ayurvedic herb, and I'm going to go a bit more in depth on that one. Apple cider vinegar linked with various benefits for gastrointestinal health that I believe Yvonne, who did my introduction, knows a great deal about gastrointestinal health. And it also supporting the immune system. And we're now, research is growing in terms of the gut immune connection, the gut brain connection. So apple cider vinegar certainly is experiencing or trending upward in terms of its popularity. Another herb, elderberry, supportive of immune health. Again, given what we've gone through in almost the last 2 years, many of these herbs that can have an immune function have gained in popularity tremendously. Ginger is another one. And ginger has been used or highlighted in several different studies, both from supporting or being helpful against certain oral bacteria to possibly lowering cholesterol. It also has some antioxidant effect, some anti-inflammatory effect. Again, I'm going to be going into the concept of inflammation and health more in depth, but ginger can play a role, and you'll often see it blended with tea, which also has some anti-inflammatory effects. Echinacea is another one linked with immune health, and again, you will see that combined with tea. And so this concept of blending teas with some of these other herbs can really have this additive effect, and people are demanding, consumers are demanding more from the foods that they use from a health perspective. So it's important to be aware of how they're being used and combined. So touching on those herbs, I want to kind of refocus our attention to the idea of tea as medicine. And as I introduced in the beginning of my talk, I gave a bit of historical context, and I'd like to do this as well with tea. And we're all aware of tea's presence for millennia in many cultures around the globe, but knowing that as far back as the Paleolithic period, and there's archaeological findings of tea leaves in boiling water. And as you travel along this timeline that I have here, many of these concepts you've been aware of, but to let you know that toward the end of the timeline, that 1970s and beyond in terms of modern medicine is where I'd like to shift our focus. And this is a slide that I'm hoping those of you who may not be fully in the research community, I wanted to introduce this concept to you of what or how herbs, teas, really anything that's used for human health in terms of a medicinal or a treatment is viewed from the standpoint of research and scientific acceptance. And this is a wonderful little checklist. I've kept it very brief so that you can refer to it readily and easily. But these are a brief list of items or ways that we look at a compound if we're going to use it for a human therapy. And I think any of these herbs and tea as well needs to be looked at through the same light as it is in the various studies that are conducted. But if it's going to be used for human health, if it wants to be accepted scientifically and stand toe-to-toe with some of these other therapies, these are the criteria that we often refer to. So first, does it have a physiologic effect? If it doesn't do anything in terms of human health, obviously we're not going to be evaluating it. Next, from the standpoint of risk assessment and toxicity. So how safe is it? If it is a compound where 100 people use it, one has an absolute cure, whatever they're trying to target, that's fantastic, but the other 99 expire or die, well, clearly that is not a treatment that we would continue from a risk perspective. Now, let's say it passes that, and we get to the step of pilot studies. These are some of the earliest small-scale studies to assess the potential benefit of a compound. If we pass that stage, we then get to the RCT, and that's the randomized controlled trial, the gold standard in terms of research to assess efficacy of a compound. And then lastly, and this last one, outcome studies, that tends to occur later in the cycle of any research, but in its basic terms or as a broad definition, that's typically or generally concerned with the effectiveness of a public health large-scale intervention. But we can also consider it from the standpoint of, let's say there's an entire culture or group or country or community where they, for example, drink several cups of tea every day. Over time, how does that provide more of a large-scale public health benefit? So that, in a nutshell, is an outcome study. But this brief checklist is just a handy one to have available. So when we talk about tea as medicine, again, we know it's been used for millennia, but more recently, in terms of a modern medicine perspective, 1950s Japan, we see research studies on tea, and then 1970s, we have Linus Pauling. And for those of you who aren't familiar with him, he was a famed scientist and a Nobel Prize winner. In 1954, he won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. And what some may not be aware of is he actually won the Nobel Peace Prize as well in 1962. So a two-time Nobel Prize winner. But some of the work that he did, not what he won his Nobel Prize for, but some of his studies related to the concept of antioxidants. And what that did is it opened the door for others to start to focus on that notion of antioxidant. And I'm going to go more in depth in that in a moment. So I just wanted to pepper that in here. Then we get to the 1990s and we enter the era of the biochemistry of nutrition. So now we're really looking at herbs from an evidence-based standpoint where we can do in-depth chemical analysis. We're looking at it from the lens of medical genetics and epigenetics, which I've already mentioned. And of course, what functional compounds are present in tea and other herbs that can impart a health effect. Again, as I'm talking about tea, I'm talking about the Camellia sinensis plant. I don't really think I need to highlight that, but nonetheless, I wanted to remind everyone I'm talking about the tea plant, but from a botanomedical perspective. So when you look at that beautiful, glistening cup of tea, what functional ingredients are we drinking? Well, there are literally hundreds, and there are probably several hundred more that have yet to be elucidated. There are many other compounds that have been identified but not studied in depth. So my talk and my time with you today, I'm only going to touch base on one, but there are many. And the one that I'm touching upon, again, it's because of its popularization lately as this whole notion of functional medicine and food as medicine has experienced such rapid growth. And it's something that many consumers are looking for. So I wanted to provide a bit more background on this particular compound. So one of the functional ingredients that we do see in tea are antioxidants, but antioxidants are really an overarching umbrella, and there's many different subtypes. And so I wanted to touch base on those. So if you consider antioxidants as this broad category, one of the types of antioxidants are flavonoids, and we have those in tea. And interestingly, with regard to flavonoids, there was a recent study published in the Journal of Neurology, July of 2021, so recent. And it was a Harvard study where they looked at a group of thousands of consumers or thousands of customers, patients who used fruits and vegetables on a regular basis. And they were looking at the flavonoid content in the different foods that they ate. So although this study didn't look at tea, it was looking at flavonoids in fruits and vegetables, particularly berries, and found them to be very supportive of cognitive health. So I say that simply because it is an example of food as medicine. And a lot of this research is starting to appear fast and furious because society as a whole is very interested in using these compounds and experiencing or benefiting from some of the epigenetic effects. So back to flavonoids. So we have this subcategory flavonoids, and a subcategory of flavonoids are catechins, which are also present in tea. And then a subcategory of catechins, EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate, long word, starts to look a bit like my lengthy last name, but this compound is also present in tea, and it's been the interest of much research because it has a host of health benefits, many more than I could cover in today's talk, but these ideas, the flavonoids, the catechins, the EGCG, are important terms to be aware of with regard to tea and health, because you will see them with increased frequency. So as far as tea and antioxidants, the concept of antioxidants, I wanted to give you a bit more of a definition. And it is a compound that can quench reactive oxidant species. Well, what on earth does that mean? Well, the mere fact that we're all sitting here today, attending this talk together, sitting here at the colloquium, our bodies are engaged in extensive metabolic processes. And a result of those metabolic processes is our bodies produce waste products, and some of them are called oxidants. Well, these oxidants can be dangerous to our bodies if we don't have ways to neutralize them. And that is what antioxidants do, is they neutralize these potentially dangerous oxidants. Current tea research looking at this, I have listed here based on over 100 articles. It is far beyond that. There are hundreds and hundreds of articles looking at tea from the perspective of antioxidants. But what antioxidants have the ability to do is they can act on biomarkers of inflammation. So again, that idea of inflammation, and I'll be providing you more information on that as we move forward. But antioxidants can help modulate signal transduction pathways in the body, and they can upregulate antioxidant enzymes. So they can upregulate our antioxidant defenses, and that's something that tea can be supportive of. In terms of tea and health research, it spans many different types of studies, but also many different organ systems in the body. So in a lab bench setting, in Petri dishes and so forth, we have in vitro studies looking at tea. But we also have animal studies using animal models, and human studies, so many different types. And the organ systems in terms of human health that are being evaluated for tea's application from a health perspective involve the brain and cognitive health, involve oral health. There's some compounds in tea that are linked with decreasing or helping to inhibit certain oral bacteria that are linked with dental caries. And interestingly, I mentioned a few slides prior that ginger has some of those compounds. So now the wheels get turning on what interesting ways can we combine some of these herbs to maybe up the ante or have a more additive effect for that targeted treatment or therapy. Then cardiovascular support. In terms of tea, some of the strongest research exists in this area in terms of cardiovascular health and stroke prevention. But other areas are bone health, cancer prevention, and weight management. Again, in the coming years, I think we're going to see much more research coming out due to the heightened interest of this notion of epigenetics, of functional medicine, and using food as a conduit for optimal health. So with that brief foray into tea and one of the functional compounds in tea, I want to move our attention back to this idea of combining tea with other herbs for a synergistic effect. So when we talk about other herbs. Obviously, that could be an entire course in and of itself. So what I decided to do was focus on one herb category that you will see readily combined with teas, and certainly with increased frequency once I describe to you some of the effects for this herb class that I'm going to introduce. So we're going to focus on an herb class called adaptogens, and how adaptogens can be used with tea for this additive effect. So the herb class of adaptogens, the current science in this herb class, and there are dozens of herbs that are classified as adaptogens, and the list continues to grow. I'm going to go a bit more in depth on 4 of them for you to introduce the concept, but at least it will hopefully pique your interest to maybe learn more about them. But the current research, current science looking at adaptogens, it focuses on in different areas of health, but there's 2 main areas where the research has been focused. And that's in terms of stress, the body's physiologic response to chronic exposure. And in a moment, I'm going to differentiate short-term versus chronic exposure. And then again, this concept of inflammation in many different organs in the body, gut, brain, heart. So it can cause deleterious effects in many different organ systems if it's left unchecked. So this field, or this category of herb, these adaptogens, in order for an herb to be classified or to gain acceptance within this category, it needs to have certain common characteristics, which they all share. And it can be to varying degrees, but they need to have it to some degree. So a constitutionally normalizing effect on the body. They can help the body respond to stress to varying degrees, have some degree of antioxidant activity, again, some more than others, but some degree, and to be non-toxic. Now, on the right side of the screen, you'll see some of the health benefits associated with some of these antioxidants. They can help support blood glucose metabolism and maintaining a healthy blood sugar, blood glucose level. They can help with energy and stamina, with focus, with immune resistance, and to help to control or lower anxiety and stress. And that is one of the reasons they've been used with much greater frequency during the pandemic the last 2 years, because many consumers are obviously looking for ways to help control stress. So again, this concept of stress and inflammation from a physiologic or a medical perspective, when I talk about stress, I'm talking about ways to stabilize the neuroendocrine and HPA axis. HPA stands for hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is part of our stress response system. And then inflammation, there's another term I would like to make you aware of, is this notion of inflammaging. And a lot of the research is focusing on how inflammation in the body is aging us, is harming us. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail as well. So first of all, a bit about stress. And as I describe this to you, it not only is going to pertain to how these adaptogens can be helpful, but tea as well. So to highlight, stress occurs in many different ways. Many people think of it simply in the psychological form, but poor diet can cause stress. Environmental stressors, toxins in the environment can be stressful. Is someone a smoker? Do they drink alcohol to excess? Are there just toxic compounds based on where they live environmentally that are stressful to the body, because the body needs to have a way to break them down and remove them? And if they can't, it's going to cause a stressor to the system, and that can lead to inflammation. But as I mentioned previously, even normal aging, even basic metabolic functions in the body are going to cause oxidants to be produced, as I mentioned, but if that can't be removed readily, that can cause stress to the system. And then, of course, physical stress, extremes of physical activity, for example. But what I'm really going to focus on is abnormal stress. All of us can have regular day-to-day stress. So you're focusing on a deadline at work, focusing on an exam during your studies. That can cause short-term stress. your body is meant to accommodate that, and it can respond to it and return to baseline. But what I want to focus on is the chronic stress, a lot of the stress that people have been experiencing the last 2 years as we deal with the pandemic and the social isolation, the illness and infection that has come with it. So that type of chronic stress, and when it's allowed to go unchecked for extended periods of time, what does it do to the body? Well, physiologically, it will elevate your cortisol and epinephrine. Those are some of our main stress hormones, but it can elevate your insulin levels, your blood glucose, your blood pressure, and cholesterol. These are all things that can be the slippery slope to diabetes, to heart disease, to obesity. So many of the illnesses that plague our society today in epidemic proportion. But other things that stress can cause, it will decrease quality sleep. And in another slide, I'm going to show you how important that is. It will lower our immune defenses, lower growth hormone, which is an important regenerative hormone. But another interesting thing that it can do is chronic high levels of cortisol can be toxic to our brains. There's an area of the brain called the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is involved in memory and learning, and it is sensitive to cortisol. Well, these high levels of cortisol, studies have linked this. For example, people with PTSD, and they've studied this in veterans. It can affect that brain structure and affect our ability to learn, affect our memory, and the ability for our brain to function optimally. So it's something that we really do need to address because it can lead to a lot of long-term conditions. And then the other thing I've cited here, it's an anesthesiology article back from 2003. I listed it simply to show you that for almost 20 years now, research has been aware, or studies are highlighting the concept of this high chronic stress and how it can lower our immune system. Now, this example I included because it is something that I think any of us listening today have experienced at one time or another. And if you haven't, please reach out to me. I will be absolutely shocked and amazed. But that is sleep deprivation. Even 1 to 2 nights of poor sleep can do the things that I have listed on the screen here. It can elevate cortisol, that stress hormone that I mentioned, elevate insulin, elevate our sympathetic tone, that's our blood pressure and our heart rate, and elevate inflammation. So you could see with many of the day-to-day lifestyle stimuli that people encounter, if even their sleep is affected and they're not sleeping well, this can lead to negative health effects over time, and we need healthy or preventive ways that we can address them. Another thing to highlight is that stress accelerates aging. And by the way, I'm not here to simply stress you out and talk about all the negative effects of stress. I'm also going to move forward and talk about some of the herbs and tea and ways that we can counteract that. But this concept of stress causing or contributing to cellular aging is measured in the length of specialized genetic segments called telomeres. And I'm going to show you one on the next screen. But shockingly, some studies have linked it to aging by as much as 10 years. Now, here's an electron micrograph of a chromosome. And within the chromosome, you'll see the double-stranded helix, or DNA, and the yellow caps, those are telomeres. Telomeres provide a protective structure to the end of that chromosome, and they protect the DNA. Well, during times of prolonged and chronic stress, those telomeres get nicked and damaged, and that can contribute to our DNA not functioning properly and to cellular aging. Now, some ways that we can work and in a preventive way to decrease stress are through some of these adaptogens. And these adaptogens can be combined with tea in wonderful ways as consumers demand more from the food that they put into their bodies. Some of these blends are ways to address that. So I've already mentioned ashwagandha, and that is an adaptogen, and it has some of the effects that I have listed here. Now, on the bottom of the slide, I list a dose, but some people do take them in capsule form, but what I really am talking about today is combining some of these herbs with teas and to be placed in a glass and drunk. So it's a calming herb. It's linked with lowering blood glucose or helping to control it, as is tea. It can help modulate the immune system, and it can help with that stress response. And what's interesting, looking at the adaptogens and even looking at ashwagandha and tea, you think of a compound in tea, L-theanine, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's an amino acid in tea that cognitively or in the brain, it can have a calming effect. So you can have something like ashwagandha combined with tea and have a wonderful calming combination. Now, here's another adaptogenic herb, Asian ginseng, and it has some of the properties that I've listed here on the right. And again, how would this be combined with tea, or what would be the reason? Well, this type of ginseng is associated with supporting mental function, work performance. We know that tea also has some cognitive benefits. So again, that could be a very nice combination. But one thing to bear in mind with this particular herb is it's likely the most stimulating of all the adaptogens. And in some cases, for those persons who are already hypertensive, it can raise blood pressure. So it's just something to be mindful of. And if someone has hypertension, this may be an adaptogen that they don't want to use. There's many others to choose from. Another one is rhodiola, and this is probably one of my favorite of all the adaptogens. It is the most well-researched of all the adaptogens, and it has a wonderful history. Back in the 1950s in Russia, Russian scientists were made aware of this herb because it grows native to a number of places around the globe, but one of them is Siberia and the Altai mountain range, which now borders China, Mongolia, and Russia. And Russian scientists had heard folk stories of how persons using this herb were experiencing good health and longevity, and they wanted to know more about it. Well, as they researched it, they were impressed enough that they started to provide it to Russian cosmonauts who were, in space for extended periods of time, and there were ill effects associated with that. Well, they found that those cosmonauts who were using rhodiola were able to recover from some of those ill effects of space a bit more quickly. It helped with recovery of fatigue. It was helpful for memory. And so they started to, at one point, use it with all the cosmonauts in the Russian space program. Moving forward, maybe a decade or so, Russian Olympians started to use this herb, being that it did help to decrease fatigue. Other athletes around the globe became aware of it, and now it's an herb that you see in many different formulas for decreasing fatigue and helping to recover from those effects. But another interesting thing with rhodiola is a number of studies have highlighted its potential to help increase mood. And in Europe, in Germany in particular, you see this herb used for that as well, along with another herb called St. John's wort. But some of the benefits for rhodiola that I've listed here can also make it a nice herb to combine with Camellia sinensis. Now, here's the last adaptogen that I'll introduce to you today. This botanical, interestingly, the name is still ginseng, but it is different from the Asian ginseng that I mentioned a moment ago. This is Siberian ginseng, and you'll see the botanical name in the upper right is entirely different. It is a different herb, a different plant. But this adaptogen is associated with improving endurance, post-stress recovery, so it's another one that athletes like. Again, mental alertness, it can help in cognitive function. So that is another benefit of Camellia sinensis. It can offer a nice benefit for the two to be blended. And I mention that because you already see a number of these blends out there, but I wanted to highlight why that is occurring. So I've highlighted for you the 4 that I've mentioned. But there are many others. I've listed them here, but by no means is this list exhaustive at all. And you will probably see them offered with increased frequency out in the public as this concept of functional foods continues to grow. So in conclusion, there are many different concepts that I covered with you today, but a few items to really walk away with is that this concept of functional foods, whether it be the adaptogens that I've mentioned, certainly Camellia sinensis can be used individually or in combination to actually alter cellular function and have an epigenetic effect in the body, which is such a powerful thing for us to be able to offer and use for ourselves and for others. Also, the health compounds in tea absolutely have a functional capacity to support health and in some different ways. Now, that research is continuing to grow, and as it continues to grow, I think we're going to find more applications. And then in terms of these tea herb blends, which you are going to see with greater frequency, they have this potential synergistic and additive effects for different health benefits. And as health consumers become more savvy with what they demand as far as what they're going to spend their hard-earned money on and what they're going to put in their body, they're going to be more selective. They want to get more effect, more benefit, and they're looking for some of these types of blends where they can get as much as possible from whatever it is they may be putting into their body. And then another thing that I want to mention again that I highlighted at the beginning of the talk was that functional foods and the herbal industry are experiencing unprecedented growth. So if you are in this space or are looking to be in this space to a greater degree, your time and your efforts are well placed because there's an absolute tailwind going on right now, and that's going to continue for some time to come. And also on that note, I'm in the innovation space. I love creating new compounds of this type. So please reach out to me. I think part of this is to find wonderful ways for all of us in this space to work together and to build new and exciting offerings. So with that, I really want to thank everyone for your time today. You have such an exciting day ahead of wonderful speakers, but I hope this provides somewhat of a high-level view of a lot of the different, more in-depth topics that you're going to hear about today. So with that, I really want to thank you for your time and open it up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nada, for your clear and comprehensive presentation. Tina Tan will be the moderator for Q&A. So with that, Tina, please take over.
Okay, hi, I'm Tina. I am 4-year student at UC Davis, and I am studying food science and statistics. So thank you so much, Dr. Nada. I hope you all enjoyed this amazing presentation. We are going to beginning asking the question submitted during the presentation. If you have any question for Dr. Nada, please add them in the Q&A session. Dr. Nada, are you ready?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I got a lot of questions.
Okay.
So most of our participating was curious about the herbal tea. They was asking about the benefit of the tea. So they was asking about, is there any limit on the tea consumption, and what would be the amount of the tea we should drink per day to reap the most health benefit?
Sure. So there are a number of different studies looking at different amounts of tea, but even as little as 3 cups of tea per day, there was even a few studies looking at 2 cups of tea per day to have health benefits. As far as an upper limit, the one thing to be aware of, I mean, if someone is drinking, let's say 8 to 10 cups of tea per day, if it's something to an excess, what can happen is tea can impact iron absorption in the body, but someone would really have to be consuming in excess to cause, let's say, an anemia. But a lot of the health benefits that you see in studies are with as little as 2 to 3 cups per day. So it doesn't take a lot to reap the benefits of using tea as a functional food.
Okay, thank you. And also we have participating asking about like, so we are going to add some ingredient in the tea. So is it, we are going to add in the herb to the tea. Is it affecting the antioxidant property of the tea? So is it, and then how safe we adding the ingredient to the tea?
Well, how safe different herbs are, if that's the question.
Yeah.
It depends on a host of different factors, meaning certainly the quality of the herb, how it's processed, are there any, additives to it, how it's been, handled. That's one aspect, but some things to be aware of, like specific to an individual patient, for example, and I'll just list one, but there are many. Ashwagandha, because that's one of the herbs that I mentioned today. In some persons who have a thyroid disorder, it can affect thyroid hormone. It can affect the conversion. I don't want to go too in depth, but you have two main types of thyroid hormone in the body, T4 and T3, and it can affect the conversion of T4 to T3. So this is just one example. If someone has a thyroid condition, and if they're going to use an herb like ashwagandha, to be careful not to do it in excess. But typically, when someone is consuming an herb in liquid form, they're drinking it, let's say in a cup of a tea, a tisane, an herbal tea blend, it's in much smaller amounts than if they are consuming an herb in a capsule form, where you saw on that screen where I listed, there can be, up to a gram of a compound in a capsule. So it's a different amount, certainly, when it's combined in a cup in a tea herb blend.
Cool. So, and also, people would like to know, would you recommend or suggest putting the tea benefit in the package, in the tea package?
I'm sorry, putting the dose,
The
or
tea
just
benefit, the tea benefit.
okay.
Yeah.
What you do when you list things on a label, and that's an entire talk in itself, when it comes to labeling health benefits on a box, you need to exercise a degree of caution, because if you are making health claims to the point, this will, this is to be used for cardiovascular disease or for diabetes, that can trigger, let's say in the US, the FDA saying that, well, if you're purporting that it can help to cure or be used to treat a specific pathology or condition, this is something that needs to be evaluated by the FDA. This is actually a medicine. So when you're listing some of the benefits, and again, this is an entirely separate talk, so I'm simply scratching the surface on this, is to mention that you can list certain aspects of tea that it is supportive of, but I would exercise some caution if you're listing very specific disease conditions that it could address. So I hope that's helpful. Again, that's a brief response to what could be a very lengthy discussion.
Okay, sounds good. And so, and also people was very interested in the optogen. So do you have any recommendation based for the of the optogen to the like the PTSD patient, to the yeah.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, which adaptogens can be helpful for?
Yeah, for the helping with the individual that have the PTSD, or helping the people for sleepy, for relaxing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, of all the adaptogens, one of the most calming is ashwagandha. So that certainly can be a helpful herb in that regard. And then I mentioned the compound in Camellia sinensis in tea, L-theanine. Many are familiar, but if you're not, let me spell that. It's L-theanine, and it's an amino acid that can pass the blood-brain barrier, enter the brain, and have a calming effect. And so tea can have that as well. Now, again, it depends on how much caffeine is in that particular tea plant and how it's processed, because obviously caffeine can have somewhat of a stimulating effect. But you do have some calming compounds in tea as well. But specific to your question, one of the calming adaptogens is the ashwagandha.
Okay, so you talk about like the caffeine will be affecting the benefit of the adaptogen. So yeah, so people also was asking what would the best the base of the tea. So because we have different kind of tea, white tea, green tea, red tea, and black tea. So what would be recommended? Is there different?
Right. Oh, good question. So interestingly, some people think, oh, black tea is always the most caffeinated, which really is not the case. It depends on how the tea, where the tea is grown, how the tea is processed. There's many factors that are going to affect the end product and the amount of caffeination. Certainly from a perspective, if you're looking for someone to use tea more for relaxation rather than cognitive stimulation and mental focus, you would want to be on the lower end. Does it have to be 0 milligrams tea? No. But something in the range of 10, 20, 30 milligrams of tea is, unless someone is unbelievably sensitive to caffeine, and you do have some individuals that are hypersensitive to it, but some of those lower caffeine amounts are going to provide some of the cognitive benefit when it's coupled with the L-theanine without being too overly stimulating. Again, it depends on the individual. If someone is hypersensitive to it, then you do want to keep it as low as you can.
Cool. So I think there is the time for one more question. So I will want to ask you is, what is your comment on the future scenario of the functional tea?
I'm sorry, on the future of functional tea?
The future scenario of the functional tea.
Okay. The future of, and I'm sorry, I want to make sure I understand, of the neurological aspects or just functional tea in general?
I think it's the functional,
Okay.
the general of the function.
It is definitely on the rise. As I mentioned in the talk, the concept of functional compounds for human health is really experiencing quite a bit of growth. And for tea to be part of that momentum, one of the aspects to consider is having it combined with some of these other herbs that are experiencing explosive growth. In any industry, if you're looking to expand your reach, you want to ride the wave or the tailwinds of what's currently going on. And seeing that some of these other herbs have some of them I listed at the beginning of the talk, ashwagandha, echinacea, some of them experienced over 100% growth in terms of the expenditure, at least in the US, on those individual herbs. So being part of that movement for tea to sort of align itself or go in that direction can be certainly a helpful way to go if you're looking to expand the scope and the use of this wonderful time-honored herb that is tea.
Cool. Actually, I have the last question is, what would be the best way to contact you?
I will, I have a site and you can send an email there, but certainly they can reach out to Catherine. But my site is, I don't know if I can type it somewhere that you can make it available. Can I put it in a chat? It's, okay, it's, you can? Okay, I'll enter it in here because then maybe you could share it with the group. It's drnada.net. So that's drnada.net. And through there, they could send an email to me. But certainly they can also reach out to GTI, and I'm happy to connect, happy to help. I think part of the excitement in all of this is being able to innovate and just create wonderful things together and expand our knowledge along the way. So
Okay.
thank you so much, Tina.
Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Nara, for asking those questions and for the great presentation. So thank you for attending. We hope you have learning and enjoyed this presentation. So please enjoy the rest of the Colloquium, and we are welcome our next speaker, Professor Hammett. Thank you.